What's going on, everyone? Again, this message is for David. This is one more of ways to help you. I told you I was going to make a video about some of the things that you did wrong, and I want to point it out. And one of the best things I could do is come back and listen to the exact claim and show you what they were trying to point out to you. So,
See, this is Keisha.
Something in existence, right? A creation. Okay, I'm gonna form my question so it can be clear as possible. Something in existence in this earth. Is it logical to think that it magic, not even magic, it just appeared from nothing, or that it was created?
Oh my God!
to say that, what you are implying in the second part is that something was created. You're implying creation. You're putting that into the narrative or the premise, and that's something that you would have to prove because not everybody adheres to that. I'm one that does not necessarily adhere to the creation. I'm pretty sure you go on to use an analogy either at this point or later where you say that if you start running, or if you go outside and you start running, did you not create that? You created that specific event. I'll give you that one. But you didn't create the act of running, which is what they jumped right to. I don't think that was correct. I think they should have walked to it over skipping over the middle part. But when they say it's a loaded question, they mean the fact that you're implying creation into your premise. So you're presupposing. It's called the presupposition fallacy. It's where you're presupposing something into the premise. Either everything came out of nothing and appeared out of nothing, or it was created. If you're going to say that that's the case, then created does not imply a specific creator. That's one thing that I would think, and I think I've also already heard you and dealt with you jumping to. It implies a creator, but that is not exactly true. So that's the point that they're trying to get at. But either way, since it's loaded in the premise, there's a part of that premise that you are responsible for explaining. So to ask that question, you're presupposing something into the question that you have to now learn to remove or reword to have your question be actually valid and not a logical fallacy. If it's fallacious, then it can just be rejected off the fact that it's fallacious. It doesn't have to be proved wrong, but it's faulty. The other thing that they said you were doing was you're equating an analogy that made sense to something that's completely different and not equal to it. Let's look it up quick. The faulty analogy. This fallacy consists in assuming that because two things are alike in one or more aspects, they are necessarily alike in some other respect. Examples: medical student, no one objects to a physician looking up a difficult case in medical books. I don't get that. Watching this back, I'm just going to fix the faulty analogy example. Medical student says, no one objects to a physician looking up a difficult case in medical books. Why then shouldn't students taking a difficult examination be permitted to use their textbooks? It's alike, where you're linking two things that don't really go together. But the faulty analogy is you're assuming that two things are alike. So your thing of saying that, you wouldn't assume that there's a cat I can't logically say that there's a cat on your block, is equivalent to saying I can't logically say that there's no God. To them, you stated that you must exhaust the entire universe to prove God doesn't exist, to be honest. And at 34-minute mark, you wrote, because you haven't traveled the world and universe, how can you be in a position that depends on no evidence being in existence that God exists? So what you're saying to them, you're equating, I know what a cat is, and I'm going to make up saying that there's one on your block, and that's not logical. So it's not logical for me to say that there's no God because I don't know, and I haven't been all over the entire universe to prove that there's no God. That's not equal. Those are not two equal things. They're similar, yes. It's a similar circumstance, but it's not equal in the totality of the question, in a sense. Another thing that they had pointed out that you were doing, or that you seemed to be misunderstanding, was when you were saying that atheism is lack of belief based on anything. Once you said based on, you're incorrect. You're actually incorrect. By definition, atheism is just the lack of belief in God. Period. They have their reasons, which may some be based on evidence, but their position is, I don't believe in God. So once you say based on, I know where you're going with this. And I know what you mean is you hold this position based on this, so that's illogical. However, they look at it, I think, like, I should say, you say that they hold the position based on the fact that they haven't searched or it's illogical because, or once you say anything about atheism past what it is, you're wrong. So, but where you seem to be going with it is that you think they base a decision on lack of evidence. And they can't claim lack of evidence when they haven't searched the entire universe. And they say that you aren't in the middle ground position, you're in the affirmative, based on the limited evidence that's been presented and what they would probably consider faulty evidence that's presented, and anecdotal evidence that's largely presented, which ties in generally to the belief in the other evidences. So they say, oh, he mentioned, oh, we only seen 5% of the universe. It's not a direct shot at anybody, but to say, oh, that's so small, there's so much more. Well, within that tiny little bit, you've jumped to the conclusion that there definitely is a God there. And it's not only that there is one, but there is a specific one. And they look at that like that's illogical. To ignore the fact that there's so much more to seek out that may answer every question that you have and explain everything that you have and possibly falsify everything that you believe, and you're jumping to the opposite conclusion. So you're doing the same thing. But that's where it seemed like you were going with it. You just couldn't get there because you have to stop and agree when they say that atheism is not a lack in belief based on, it's a lack in belief. That's it. You could say it's illogical to hold to atheism if you base it on lack of evidence because you haven't done this. And they can say, well, it's illogical to believe that there is something there if you base that on you've explored and haven't found anything to prove it wrong. You haven't explored the entire universe yet, so you're in the same exact position. But those are a couple of the things that I think that would help to explain their position and help you to see where you were faulty at in trying to address them. Loading a question with a premise that somebody doesn't necessarily hold to creates a fallacious question. Using an analogy that doesn't exactly equal up is a fallacious analogy. And then when you break your reasoning down, it can hold exactly to you. You haven't searched the entire universe to see if the Bible was wrong. You haven't gone to the end of the universe to see if the Bible was wrong. I think there was another one. That was it. I do give them, if you happen to share this, I do note that you never did state in this debate that you didn't understand fallacies. You stated that you weren't familiar with the not the ad hoc, with the anecdotal evidence. The anecdotal evidence thing. You didn't seem to be grasping that either. You kept pointing to you can't use anecdotal evidence in the court of law, but it's your specific one. When you're going to refer to something that only you saw, only you experienced, and only you can verify, that had absolutely nothing to do with anybody else and no involvement of anybody else, that type of evidence would not be used in the court of law. Maybe I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure if you walk in and you have no other tie to something and say, hey, judge, I wasn't there, I didn't see her, but I was in my room and God told me that she did it. You were in your room, had your own experience, and God told you that she did it, or he did it, whatever, that wouldn't hold up. That's the type of anecdotal evidence that doesn't work that doesn't work in logic. So it's hard to say your position was more logical when many of your arguments came from illogical bases. I got where you're going with a lot of what you were saying, but in these areas you were faulty and didn't seem to grasp where your fault was coming in, even with the way that they were explaining it to you. So hopefully this helps. I'll probably have more to go over more of it, but hope this helps. Have a good one. Oh, and just to tie into the other convo that we're having, think of that whole you created running thing, right? You go outside and you start running. You don't go from a standstill to running. You don't. It's maybe a fast process between anything from standstill to being in constant motion, but to take one step is not running. It's multiple at the least. So in that process, are you the one that's firing off the signals that are going to your legs and your arm and everything to start pumping faster? You think it. I give you that one. Yes. You think I'm going to now, boom, start running. But there's so many other processes that are now going on between continuing to move your legs up and down and swing your arms and breathe and blink and scan and take in everything. You're doing all of this. You're doing every bit of it. But is it you? Is it David that's doing that? So when you say that you created running, did you? Did you do the whole thing? You did.